manage their health rather than letting them avoid taking care and ending up in a crisis, which is going to be quite a bit more expensive. Plus, it's not good for the employee. So, yeah.
How can they legally share that information with the HIPAA laws in place?
Well, that's why you have an intermediary that's not company affiliated. It's an outside firm that looks at the data. And what they've usually done is encrypted the employee-specific data so that they're not looking at a person's name. You know, and what they often do is have a case manager or a nurse that is working with that employee to encourage them to do this or, you know, something like that. So there's a way to use the information and not get anybody in the employer aware of it, but to try and work that employee more into a healthier lifestyle to not only help the employee have a better life, but also reduce the claims expense.
But would the employee have to give this third-party company permission to assign them a case manager?
Yeah, there would probably be, what would normally happen is the data dump comes from the insurance company. And then it goes into the software system and they run all sorts of analytical reports on it. Because what generally the rule is that 20% of your population is costing you 80% of your money. That's just the general, it's very, very common. So what they do is look for those people that they need to work with. And then there would be an authorization to get them engaged in some type of case management. Yeah.
If you were working for, if you were the employer or working for an HMO, how would you determine what you do not pay for because of the HIPAA Act? Because I know HMOs don't cover everything for certain cases.
Right.
So how would you know, like, okay, well, you know, we can't pay for this because, you know, so because of the HIPAA Act and you not being able to look at certain things, how would you know what you can and cannot pay for?
How would they decide how the policy is designed? What the insurance plan pays for?
Yeah.
Generally what they do is what's competitive. And that's not always, insurance has always been crisis oriented as well. So they tend to pay for things when you're sick. Now with the HMOs, what they've started to bring in is preventive care, but there's still sort of a market expectation out there. We'll pay for well visits, we'll pay for, you know, immunizations of kids, we'll pay for maternity, you know, those kinds of things. But for example, I give you a specific example. Years ago when I was working at a hospital, the insurance company would not cover having a fetal monitor in the home. Well, the mother needed to be on bed rest to finish the term of the pregnancy. But they didn't want to cover having a fetal monitor. And I'm thinking, well, that is so much cheaper than having a preemie baby. You know, it doesn't make any sense to avoid putting a fetal monitor when she's got to be on bed rest anyway at home that's probably going to cost me $35 a week, and instead you're taking the chance that that baby won't go to term and it'll cost me $100,000. Didn't make any sense at all. But I had to fight with Blue Cross and Blue Shield because it wasn't the way things had been done. It was one of those pieces that wasn't covered. So that one of the things that you have the power to do as somebody working with this stuff is to push back on the insurance company and say, this is practical. This makes good sense. It's good for the patient, it's good care, and it's good for business. This is something that you need to change.
Because I have insurance that I pay for family planning, but wouldn't pay for me to have my tubes tied, and I'm like, that's part of family planning. Well, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, there's two things. You got to look at how your employer has designed the policy, because believe it or not, social and religious views of the people who are running the company come into play whenever those insurance policies are written. So, for example, if you were working for, and I don't mean to offend any Catholic in here or anything, but if you're working for somebody who's completely against birth control, then that could be disallowed in the policy, because that was the philosophical position of the people who ran the company, that they wouldn't pay for it. So you'd have to go to the policy first and see if there's any reason why this is not covered, and then kind of, you know, it wouldn't be just an insurance company kind of decision. It might also be run, you know, be engineered by the company itself. So it could be twofold. But that's also an area where it's a little bit grayer, because then you start to get into, you know, what they will do, what they won't do, and it can be a really gray area where you're talking about family planning. So they tend to be more conservative rather than less. It just depends on the philosophy of the company. So you might be able to shoot for it though. Okay. Trying to keep us moving forward. Income replacement is really sort of this big picture of various pieces, what I'm trying to say, because it's really composed of time off with pay that may come from a sick leave policy, disability that comes from an insurance policy, and also short and long-term disability, and also that can feed into Social Security disability. So all of these things are sort of part of this big pie. And you often start working with sick leave in the beginning, because if your employer provides sick leave, they're going to expect you to use that first. Then you've generally got a waiting period before short-term will kick in. Sometimes it's 7 days, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's an insured policy, sometimes it's self-insured. It just depends on the size of the employer and what their setup is. Then, if short-term generally lasts until however long the waiting period is for long-term disability. In other words, if I have long-term disability and short-term kicks in and pays up to 26 weeks. Then long-term kicks in and picks up and pays, let's say, for 2 years. By that time, Social Security disability, if I'm still disabled, should have been applied for and awarded if I'm going to continue to be disabled. And either the LTD plan will offset with Social Security, or it may stop altogether, depending on how the plan is written. So disability, plus the other piece that's not on here that I didn't think to put on here was also retirement disability. Your pension plan often has a disability clause in it. Not always, it depends on the way that the benefit plan is written. But it could include retirement disability, which means that if I'm permanently disabled, regardless of what age I am, I become 100% vested maybe, and maybe I get to take an immediate distribution. So all of these things, when you're looking at somebody who's disabled, all of these things can come into play. And it can be, and plus you have FMLA to manage, because the first piece of it's going to impact FMLA. You may have state mandated plans that require coverage. For example, I think Wisconsin has a something like an additional period of time in addition to FMLA for somebody who's out on maternity leave. So you have to, and they won't let you take both FMLA and the Wisconsin family leave at the same time. They have to be back to back. So somebody might be out of work on an approved leave for 6 months, and you have to protect their job. So you have to take into concern those state requirements as well. Okay?
First question.
Yeah.
For the sick leave and the short-term disability and stuff like that, that is through usually a third party to determine that this person is eligible for this sick leave, because as you stated, that the HR person wouldn't know why you're out sick. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
that would usually go through a third party.
Not for sick leave. Sick leave is usually you call in sick. You know.
And
you
see,
use the
mine
sick
will
day.
be determined with my job. We have to, if we call in sick or something like that, it's different because we have to speak to, if you're saying, I'm sick and I'm gonna be sick for like 3 or 4 days and I got the flu. Now, I got a completely different manager that I gotta fill out papers for and say, this is why I'm out. To the papers, I have to fill the papers out. But then I don't report to my same manager that I had when I was doing my job. I have this other manager because that's all she does sick leave.
Yeah, and the reason is because of the length of time you're out. There are a lot of, because of FMLA and things like that, there are a lot of thresholds where they say, okay, you gotta have a doctor's note maybe over 3 days. Some employers will go to 5 days, because the flu can last a week. Sometimes they have to make that decision as to when something applies to FMLA and when it's not significant enough. Because you don't want to be hitting FMLA leave for every little thing you go out for, So that's probably why you're hitting that threshold, because if you're hitting a 3 or 5 day period of time, you're getting into that gray area where FMLA could come into play, depending on how long you're actually out. Yeah.
Who determines the time period before short-term disability kicks in?
Usually it is based on either the policy, or if it's self-insured, it might be based on what the employer chooses. But it's usually 7 days. Sometimes I've seen maybe as much as 30 days, because it depends. Because the other thing the employer has to consider is how good is our sick leave. If you can accumulate a lot of sick leave, then maybe we can cover 30 days, before short-term kicks in. But if you've got a very lean sick leave policy, then 7 days is probably as much as you can manage. So it's that kind of decision. A shorter waiting period, if it's a fully insured product, will be a more expensive premium because of longer benefit. Okay? Section 125 plan started out with just a premium conversion plan, the basic POP plan, just to get pre-tax treatment on your premiums. Flexible spending accounts, I'm sure everybody's familiar with those, medical and dental, not dental, what's it called? Dependent.
Daycare.
Yeah, dependent daycare. So that you have that ability to set up this account for yourself. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that your health care spending account actually falls under COBRA. It's not very practical, but it does fall under COBRA. The only reason I can think of somebody might use it is if, let's suppose I've put in $1,000 and I terminate, I have this great job offer, and I terminate, and I've still got that $1,000 in there. If I continue and pay the contributions into that healthcare spending account and I keep the door open. So I go out and spend that $1,000. But I can also spend up to the maximum I was going to put in for the entire year because I kept the door open. So that's the only reason that it's worthwhile, because you lose the pre-tax coverage of it, but it does fall under COBRA regs. Okay, full cafeteria plans. Usually these are the kind of plans where they set you up with a benefit menu and you choose what you want to enroll in, and then maybe you've got credits to use which pay for a portion of the expense. Maybe they pay for all of it. Maybe you get the money you don't use back in your paycheck, maybe you don't. Some of them do, some of them don't. It depends on the design. Okay, non-prescription drugs can be used or can be reimbursed through your healthcare spending account. So there are some new rules, and some of this came down because of people getting insulin and things like this. There were some of these things were offered over the counter, but they were really medical needs. So this has changed the rule. It's gotten much looser to where you can use for non-script. Health reimbursement accounts are a little bit different. Employer generally funds these. You have to, they set up rules because they want people to become more consumer driven in their health care. So you have to have a high deductible medical plan in association with this. And the plan reimburses employees for eligible health care expenses. And the employees may not contribute to this. It's only provided through the employer. So because it's provided by the employer to reimburse for expenses, that's where you have to be in that high deductible plan. So there are rules attached to it because this is a fund that you don't have to put any money into. Then you also have health savings account. You have the ability to contribute to these and tax defer any payments on contributions into health savings account, and these allow you the ability to reimburse expenses as well. But again, the mix is a little bit different. Again, you have to be in a high deductible health plan, but both the employer and the employee can contribute, or both. Earnings grow and tax-free, and it's portable. Now, the other thing that you're going to see that is starting to come out and is becoming more and more prevalent are retirement savings accounts. These are retiree savings accounts that allow retirees to put money in, and actually you put it in when you're an employee. They operate very similarly to the HSA, but you put the money in as an employee and then you take the plan with you to pay for retiree medical expenses. They're specifically for retiree medical expenses. Life and disability insurance protection. We've talked about a lot of these already. We've talked about how you're really looking at salary continuation, you're really looking at short-term and long-term disability. Now you can also hear, when you're talking about disability, you can hear salary continuation as the terminology that's used. Usually, if it's salary continuation, that means it's 100% pay. If it is short or long-term disability, you're looking at a percentage of the payment, like we were talking about 66 2/3. That's when you're like a disability policy or program is involved in some way. But if it's salary continuation, they're just going to continue to pay you. And that's usually for a shorter period of time. Not shorter, but short. I mean, maximum is usually 90 days, something like that. And it dovetails maybe with an LTD policy. Okay? We talked about coordinating with sick pay and FMLA, Social Security disability, we don't need to go through. Group term life, basic, very inexpensive. It's what most employers have because it's very inexpensive. It pays you a flat amount if you decease, and it pays to your beneficiaries. You can also get into whole life insurance, which is a higher premium for the life insurance, but it has a cash value that builds up. And sometimes you can get refunds on that or loans off of it. But again, it's higher premium. So paid leave, is another benefit provided by most employers. It provides for events where you're away from work. Most of the time, employers have traditionally had vacations, sick, holiday pay, these kinds of things where it's very specifically geared toward the type of absence you have. Some employers have moved to paid time off plans where everything goes into one bucket, you use it in whatever way you want to. It really depends on the employer's preference. And other benefits that are coming up, child care services, like you may have an organization that has daycare on site. Some of those are becoming more and more popular. Elder care services, for example, SAS actually has a person who works full-time for them and helps their employees find elder care solutions for their parents. So that is a new position. I don't know of any other employer that has that position in-house, but those kinds of services are starting to become more prevalent. Transportation assistance, tuition reimbursement. 529 is the new college savings plan that's often being used in state and education organizations. And then, like prepaid legal, we've heard about those. Moving right along, we're going to get into the international benefits. International benefit considerations, the quirky thing about international benefits is there are some things that are very local to the country and some things that are kind of universal. One of the things you start to work with when you get into an international mix is whether or not your employer has a home policy or a host policy. If they work under a home policy, then that means that the home base of the employer, like if let's suppose I am working for Bayer, and their home base for this division I'm working with is in the US. So everything that governs that employee is based on US rules, to the extent that it can apply. But if I say I have a host country policy and they go off and work in Germany, that means that whatever happens in Germany, the Germany rules apply. So that's the first piece about international benefits. Which way does the company govern? Then you also got to think about coordination of retirement plans. They might be working over here and have a retirement plan as a German citizen that maybe even is a state or a country engineer plan, and then they come over here and they have a retirement plan underneath the employer. So you have to look at coordination. You may have issues between the coordination of benefits. They may offset, they may not. Vacation in Europe is very different from vacation here. Here we work like dogs all the time, don't we? And so we get the 2 to 3 weeks off. In Europe, August, everybody takes them. Everybody takes vacation. So their vacation time in Europe is much longer. And you'll find that if you work in an international company, their benefits are very different. They're very into taking their time off and chilling out. And you just forget it if you're called up to get something done in August. I'll be back in September.
Wow.
So totalization agreements, basically there are some countries that have agreed to sort of do some reciprocity with the U.S., which means that they're not paying Social Security in both countries. And they sort of work together. You can get more information about this on the internet if you're interested, but they sort of work together to make sure that they're not double dipping and the employee's paying both sides. So if you're looking at the evaluation of a total comp system, the kinds of things that you need to be paying attention to, you got rules that you got to pay attention to. How well are we in compliance? What's the mission and the strategy of the overall plan? Are we really, do we want to be competitive? Do we want to be, below market? Do we want to be above market? What kind of employees are we trying to attract and retain? Does it fit our culture? For example, if I am working with 20-somethings, I would bet having more paid time off is going to be more popular than having a really great insurance plan. You got to look at who you're working with. What's your employee mix? And is it internally equity? Am I giving the executives more than I'm giving everybody else? That's a no-no. It's got to be fair and equitable. And then, am I competitive? Is the benefit program that I put together helping me compete with John Doe, who goes out here on the street and has a job offer from the guy down the corner? Am I competitive enough to where he can't come back to me and say, they're going to pay me the same salary, but their benefits are terrific? Then I'm going to be in a disadvantage.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
When you say affirmative benefits, is it equal to the executive as to employees? You said that it has to be?
Ask me that again.
With the last statement that you just stated, as far as with the benefits with referring them to employees, to executives, how it has to be the same?
Oh, okay. There is a rule and a process called anti-discrimination testing that certain plans are required. Is it all plans or is it just?
All plans.
All plans. Are required to measure whether or not all participants are being fairly and equitably treated under the same plan. What it looks for is a plan that's treating the executives better or the highly compensated better than the rest of the employee workforce. And so they'll do testing by looking at the benefits and what the eligibility rules are and how the benefits are paid out and how often, the volume is distributed evenly and all of those kinds of things. They'll look at how that plan is operating to see whether or not it meets that criteria. And you can be fined if you fail that test.
So the eligibility requirements have to be the same, but like executives, they do get other benefits that regular employees wouldn't normally get.
Right. And those benefits are things that are generally outside of the scope of ERISA, like we talked about in the non-qualified retirement plans. That's how they give them the extra perks. And stock options are not governed, so they give them those perks that are not governed by ERISA to beef up their benefit package.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So would they have to, I'm just a little fuzzy on that
That's
part.
okay.
On the non-qualified deferred compensation plans, that would be offered to the high-paid execs, but not to everyone because
Right.
it doesn't apply.
Right.
Okay.
And that's why it's non-qualified,
Okay, gotcha.
which means they don't get to take a tax deduction on contributions,
Okay.
those kinds of things. The employer doesn't get that beneficial treatment because he's not giving it to everybody.
So then would the high-paid execs also get the other plan and then this as well?
Yep.
So they have both?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, usually that's the deal.
But for instance, if only your high-paying employees, and I think high-paying now is close to $90,000. If only your high-paying employees are contributing to your 401k and your regular employees are not, is there a problem? Does it appear that there is some discrimination? Yeah, it does, okay? So your highly compensated employees, you may have to return some or all of the dollars that they put into that plan in order to avoid discrimination. So if your average employee is putting in 2% of their income, and it's a whole lot more for the highly compensated than the average, then you have to return some of the money. And I worked in a company where they did have to return some of the money to the highly compensated because the plan looked discriminatory.
How much would you consider more? 2% to 12%? Or?
There is a calculation there, but I don't know what it is. I haven't actually worked with those calculations.
And that reminds me of the time I had to go tell the president of the company that I screwed up his 401k. That was fun. It was very nice, but what did I do to deserve this FaceTime? Communication is a big thing under ERISA, that the employees need to know about the plans, they need to understand them, they need to have written documentation so they consistently get the same information. And there needs to be a communication plan and process within the organization to disseminate this information. 5500s are IRS tax forms that are submitted to the IRS. They're much more complicated for retirement plans. For health and welfare they're pretty simplistic, but they're really looking at the money that's in the plan and also making sure that you tell them about plans that are in existence and stuff and keep them informed. Other required communications, we know about cover notices that have to go out, explanation of stock options that are required by SEC, and posting of all state employment laws. You guys, I'm sure, have already been talking about that as well. So one of the things that's important for an organization is to make sure that you have this stuff written down and to make sure that it's available and distributed to employees. There are some communications that have deadlines on them that are supposed to be distributed to employees within such and such a period of time. like retirement plan communications and stuff like that. Some of that has communication deadlines. And some of it is optional. You can offer the ability to get a statement, that's available at any time, so they don't have to send out an annual statement. That's an option that some employers choose to use. So you have to make sure that this stuff is available. You also have to give employees, especially in health and welfare elections, the ability to make a change to that election at least once a year. That's where your open enrollment periods come in. Because they're doing a pre-tax type of arrangement, they can't make changes to those elections arbitrarily. They have to have what's called a family status change. That means I get married, I get divorced, I have a baby, an adoption. Something has to happen to my family to change it, so that it creates a 30-day window for me to make changes to my benefit elections that that work for that new family situation, that new family structure. So you have to give, because they're restricted and they can't make those changes at any time they want to, you have to give them an open time when they can make any changes, at least once a year. That's your open enrollment time. Direct communications, it's important for human resources people to understand enough about the benefits to be able to communicate them and to make sure that employees can come to you to get answers. Because the stuff that's written in your benefits handbook, the stuff that's written in your insurance plan, some of it is vague, some of it is in insuranceese. You can't figure out what they're actually trying to tell you. And sometimes, one of the things that I would recommend as HR people or as managers of benefits or whatever you're doing, call the vendors and dog them for answers. Make them explain it to you. Because I found that one of my best resources for learning was to go back to the people who wrote some of that stuff and say, okay, what does this mean? I don't understand. And just make them, retirement plans, whatever it happened to be, just get them to explain it to you. Especially if you're brand new on the job, you got a great excuse. Go, I'm just brand new, I got to figure this out.
I want to emphasize that word confidential under that direct communication. One of the biggest liabilities for a company is somebody talking out of turn. And in human resources and as a manager of employees, you have access to a lot of confidential information. Your employees tell you a lot of confidential information that it had better not be distributed with your name on it. That's a firing offense. If your employees cannot trust you, if your employees cannot trust the people who work in their human resource department, they will not trust the company.
That's true. And then, I believe the last slide is just to understand that risk management needs to be part of your strategy, and keep that in mind as you're making decisions and as you're developing things, that you need to be thinking about compliance requirements, you need to be thinking about expenses, and need to be thinking about how you're going to manage trends and changes to the amount of money that you spend. Because if you can be a good financial manager, within HR, then that increases your credibility with finance, and finance always has the ear of the CEO. So that's a great opportunity to be visible. Any other questions?
How many of you feel overwhelmed with information right now?
Oh, come on.
All right, what I would like you to do is go back and kind of review what you heard tonight for our next class. And the first part of next week, we'll have a question and answer session. See what you understand and what maybe you don't understand. Some of this information is in the 2 booklets that you were assigned to read tonight, and in the benefit booklet you were not assigned to read, which is the qualified retirement plans. So refer back to that, okay? Go home tonight and forget about this.
But one thing I want to close with, remember the story I told you about where I had to go tell the CEO that I messed up his 401k? Mm-hmm. I go in there and I apologize, and actually that was an example of my vice president trusting me enough to sit down and be face